they had never really made the efforts to break through in the knowledge of time travel. Ascot's people, the Timmers, come from another universe that they call the Dal universe. And their technology apparently technically was far more sophisticated than the Plejadians, and they had kind of exchanged information with the Plejadians, swapping their technical knowledge for some of the spiritual things that the Plejadians knew about. So that's how the great ship came about, and it had time travel capabilities, could move in the future or the past, and that's where the design actually came from. The Timmers, by the way, the Plejadians estimate that are probably about 350 years and evolved higher than the Plejadians are. So at that point they get outside of the ship, and the air apparently inside of the hangar now is being conditioned, whatever, so they can get out. They get outside of the ship, and Billy's looking around at how big the place is. The ceiling seems to be like 600 to 800 meters high. And almost as far as he can see, there are all sorts of flying craft parked inside there. Almost instantly, a little floating kind of platform pops up beside them, or just drifts over somehow, and Billy likens it about to the size of a Volkswagen. And they just sit down on it, and they start floating up in the air very comfortably, and they're rising almost straight up. And Billy looks up above and sees that there's a rather large hole up in the ceiling, and they seem to be floating up towards that. And she says, yeah, we're going to go right up into the ship. And Billy, after just a minute or so, he's saying, my, we're getting awful high. How high have we gone up? How big is this thing? And she remarks, well, so far we've gone up 11,000 meters. And he's quite surprised. It's 11,000 meters. That's higher than the highest mountain on Earth, Mount Everest. And she kind of chuckles and says, well, yes, you're right, but the highest mountain on Earth is not Mount Everest. And Billy says, come on, I know my geography. Our highest mountain is Mount Everest. And she says, well, that's because your scientists measure the highest mountain from sea level. We don't. We measure from the center of the planet. And because around the center of the planet, around the equator, it's farther from the center of the planet, that actually the highest mountain on Earth, the way they measure it, would be in Ecuador. And Billy says, oh yes, I remember from my geography studies, in Ecuador there's a mountain range, or there's a mountain called the Chimborazo or something like that. And she says, now you've got it. That's the highest mountain range on Earth if you measure it from the core of the planet. Well, as they float up, suddenly the little floating craft, whatever it is they're on, just floats over to the side. They're in some sort of great big open area where it just floats up through the ship. And as they're going up, they keep noticing off to the left and the right there are all these different kind of levels. And they're going by, many of them. And suddenly they float over the side, and there's sits right down on the ground, and they get off. Billy steps out, and he's just knocked out. What he's looking at, he says, looks like the most beautiful garden he's ever seen. They're in a huge area which serves as a recreation area for the people on the ship. She remarks that there's 143,000 people living on this great spacer, and that it is completely self-contained. It contains everything you need, almost like living on a normal world. It has outside recreational areas, lakes, streams. They can fly. They can grow all of their own food. They are completely self-sufficient on this great spacer. And this area that they're in is kind of a recreational facility. It's an outside area with real mountains, streams, lakes, everything, and it's huge, almost as far as you can see in here. Billy is just flabbergasted by the size of this thing, and he wants to know how big this craft really is. And she remarks that, well, the diameter of it, where we're right now in the main part of the ship, the diameter of it is 17,182 meters, which is over 10 miles in diameter. So you get some idea how big this thing is. And it's much taller. I don't know the exact height it is, but it's far taller than it is wide because it's kind of an egg shape. So the thing could be as much as maybe 20 miles high. Well, she's explaining all about the recreational facilities and so forth, and what their next thing that they're going to do. She says that that the leader of the spacer, that would be their next stop, that they're going to go up to the top of the ship, on the dome of the ship, where actually it's kind of like the flight center, I guess, the control center where they fly this. and that Billy is going to be allowed to meet the leader, who is an Ishwish, a king of wisdom, who actually is in charge of the ship, the leader of the ship. And Billy immediately says, "Uh-oh, I'm going to meet a god, huh?" And he says, "I hope he doesn't expect me to hit my knees and, get down on my knees and bow down to this guy just because he's the god of your people." And he's going on and on, just very politely so, but he's making remarks about, in our folklore, when people think of gods, they think of worship, and they get very rattled, and he's real concerned that this god's going to expect him to hobble or worship him or something. And Semjase starts to break out kind of laughing, and Billy's still going on about how he doesn't expect to grovel at all for any great god, no matter who he is. Suddenly there's this kind of loud boom in the air, and it's kind of like he hears this huge laughter, kind of like a roar across the place that they're at. And he says, "What in the world was that?" And she says, "Well, the great god, the Ishwish, up on top was actually listening in to their thoughts, and he also thought it was funny that Billy thought that he would be, a person like that. That Semjase explains in their society that people become Ishwishes because of the wisdom that they attain. They become a king of wisdom, but they are not revered or thought of as any better or less than anyone else. That everyone has equal value on the world, and they gain respect for their knowledge. But there's no groveling, there's no worship, and to be an Ishwish, a king of wisdom, which means God in our language, on their planet, doesn't mean that they're anything particularly special. You can still talk to these people, and they don't put them on any great pedestal and worship them. Well, Semjase says, "Follow me now," and they go over to another open area where there's another one of these little floating platforms. They get back on it, and they float all the way up to the top. And they're in some sort of great big kind of circular open area where there's a lot of other platforms going up and down. And they just float up to the top to this great dome. And when they get up to the top, they stay on this little platform, and they're just floating along this huge open area. First thing that Billy notices is he looks up to the ceiling and he can see the stars, and he's immediately kind of surprised that looks like we're outside. There's no ceiling. And she remarks that no, that through these high technology distortion beams they have, they project something at the ceiling, and it allows them to see right through it. That actually there is a metal ceiling there that's very strong, very hard, and protects them, so not to worry about it. As they're floating along, and Billy notices that it must be several kilometers distance long, because he can't even see the end of this. And there are all sorts of people up there working, doing different things. And he notices right away that there are some very peculiar looking humans. And it's explained to him that these are droids. They're organic people that the Pleiadians grow on purpose for specific functions. It would be like what we think of as an android. And Billy's just watching this as they're floating along. He even notices that there are some droids that looks like built right into the equipment where they're only like half a person. And these are beings, she says, that they've learned how to organically grow a brain and program it so it can do particular functions. And they're all over the place like this. Well, they're moving along, and she's explaining to him more about the equipment and where they're at and more about the ship. And Billy glances ahead, and he sees like a big kind of horseshoe-shaped area that they're slowly approaching. And there's a man standing there that's kind of looking at them. He appears to be about 70, 75 years old, and he just kind of gently smiles as they approach it. And they step off the little floating platform, and Semjase immediately runs over to this fellow and grabs him, and they're hugging, and they give each other a big kiss, and they look very, very excited to see each other. And Billy notices that he has kind of a sinking feeling. I think he's just a little bit of jealousy kind of creeps in there because he's